Hi, and welcome to the video, and thank you for joining me. In this video, we are going to be taking a detailed look at the brand new, recently released Quantum HD8. Now, the first thing I'll say is that I've been using PreSonus interfaces for a long time. The Studio 192, the different Quantum, Studio 192 Mobile. I even have a 26C, so I'm pretty familiar with the PreSonus interface lineup. But I have to say that the user experience on this, and just the way that these look in general, is a huge step up from what I'm used to seeing. The quality, the durability, even just the visual look of how these stand, the display, the LED, the buttons, the functionality, how smooth it looks and how clean it looks, it is a big step up. So if we cut over here, you'll notice that I actually have two HD8s. The bottom one here is connected to my computer. And in my computer, I'm also connected, this microphone is connected to the bottom one as well. That's what you're seeing here on the meters. We have the universal control application for the Quantum HD8. So if I toggle over to the cogwheel, you can see here's all of our settings. I'm going to try to cover as much of this as I can, but I want to try to cover a lot of ground here. So let's hop back over to the main unit over here. Now, if we click any one of these inputs, we have the ability to adjust our preamp gain. We also have a phantom power and an auto feature. So for example, let's go to input 2, start dialing up this gain. And as you can see, we have a whopping 75 dB of gain. That is a huge amount of gain. Now, the thing about this too is that it's clean. I've tested this out with dynamic microphones like the SM7 that require a ton of gain and usually require a cloud lifter or something in order for them to just be usable with a basic interface. In this case, we have a lot of headroom in terms of being able to use these. 75 dB of gain. And a lot of the times you might see that something has a lot of gain, but the last 10 dB of the gain is completely unusable for self-noise. This is actually pretty good, and I've been very, very pleasantly surprised. If we click the tab over here, we have the ability to set up phantom power, which is something that we've had in other interfaces. This is just a little cleaner, a little bit neater. In addition to that, we can click this toggle button, and we can toggle between the parameters either being off or on, so I could enable this low cut, and also as I'm doing that, you'll see that that's happening in universal control as well. We can also toggle down to the pad. If I click over to this, we can engage the pad. The next setting I want to take a look at is, let's pop back over to input 1. And temporarily, I'm going to turn down my gain all the way. So I just set this to, I generally set it so that it's somewhere between, I used to always stick at -12 or below. Now I don't mind if I hit -12, -9, even -6 with the occasional peak. These new converters are very, very clean. So what I'll do is let's detach this microphone, which I currently have selected for the Quantum. We will click input 1. And then now that we have input 1, I'm going to click the auto. And I'm just going to start talking directly into this microphone, add around the positioning. Notice the dial over here, it's changing color as it's auto detecting the level. And then when it's done, it is going to say auto gain complete. So now if we take a look, okay, interesting. So I had mine set to 55 or 56. This put it at 58. If I go over to universal control in this case, it actually looks pretty good. My peaks are around -12, -9, somewhere around there. The other thing I do want to mention is that for this video, I am actually capturing the audio that's coming directly from ScreenFlow out of the interface into my recording. So we'll be able to listen to the quality. But I'm not going to be adding any EQ or any compression or any saturation or anything. I'll just try to level off this voiceover recording. But what you're hearing is me going through just a Sennheiser 421. We're fully set to music mode, which means there's no low cuts or anything like that. And then I have just a sock to prevent plosives. But in terms of the quality, this is what we're getting. I might dial back my gain a little bit. We'll go to here. I might dial this back just to 55 to just give myself a little bit of wiggle room. A couple other things I want to make note of is that if we take a look at the main knob, the main volume encoder knob, when it's in main, obviously this is going to record, or this is going to be handling your main outs, and we can go from infinity all the way to 0. Now, if we hop over to universal control for a second, click this cogwheel, and we go to the main encoder, we can set this main encoder to be whatever we want. It can be none, it can be all, it can be 1 and 2, which is what it is right now, 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, or all. This interface has 10 analog outputs. So it's got a main out left and right, and then it has an additional 8 outputs. If you're running a 5.1 or a 7.1 mix room, or even if you're running a smaller 7.1.2 Atmos mix room, then you have one interface where your main controller knob is controlling everything. So that is very, very useful. Let's click the cogwheel and pop back out here for a moment. Okay, next up, we have our headphones. We can click either Headphone 1 or Headphone 2. At the moment, they're both green at the time that I'm doing this review or this video. We can adjust our headphone levels. I have tested these out with a bunch of different headphones that I had available to me. Anything from pretty much 32 ohms up to 38 ohms, and then some other headphones that I have which are a much higher impedance. And basically the rule with headphones and impedance is that if you have a higher impedance level, it is much, much harder to drive them clean. So this headphone has plenty of gain. The headphone amp that's built in has plenty of gain for both of these. One thing I do want to mention though with respect to the headphone routing is that our headphone routing, if we go into HP1 source or we go into HP2 source, this unit doesn't have discrete headphone routing, which to me is no big deal at all because most of the times I was having my headphones monitor the main outs. I really like this because if you are setting up a QMix or something and you wanted to quickly monitor something else, you can just have your headphone source be any one of these. So that is something to make note of. Okay, let's go back over here. Okay, so we covered the main encoder knob, we covered headphone 1, and we covered headphone 2. Also, if you double click this main tab over here, this will bring you back to your main menu. We have another knob over here. This can be custom assigned to either dim or mute. At the moment, if I click this, I can tell because it's yellowish orange that it's set to dim. You can also see that this is following in universal control. If I wanted to change the way this is set, I could change the mute button to be actually mute. And then if we come back over here, now if I click this, notice that now it's now red. So slightly different depending on what you want to do, how you want to customize that. Okay, let's take this off for a moment. The other thing is if we click this main encoder, notice we can toggle between input and output, ADAT input, then we have ADAT output, and then we have our input, and then we have our output. So lots of different ways in terms of being able to view what we're seeing on the actual OLED display. I find that to be pretty useful because sometimes you want to be taking a look at a different signal. Now, let us move over to this unit over here. On this top unit, I mentioned that I'm using this in standalone mode. The really cool thing about the way that the standalone mode works on the HD8 is that if you hold, make sure you're in your main tab, if you hold the main encoder for about 2 or 3 seconds, you actually get the global menu. Now with the global menu, we can click to toggle back and forth between the menu item and the parameters. So for example, display brightness, I can toggle over to this. I could turn down the displays over here. I'm going to leave them up for the sake of this recording. Also, I could toggle down to the LED brightness. Let's go right to here. Toggle over. Currently, these are at 15%. Let's say that I was in a super bright setup, a super bright studio. I could toggle these way up. Now you'll notice how bright these actual lights are by comparison to the bottom unit, so that can be useful. Conversely, if you're in a really, really low light setup, like when I'm working at in the middle of the night and I basically have no lights on, my computer monitor is set super low, I set these to 5% and they're pretty nice. Let's set these back to 15, as I think that's pretty good for the camera to pick up. Then we have clock source. So we can toggle between the clock source. This can be word clock, it can be ADAT, it can be SPDIF, or it can be internal. In this case, I'm clocking this top unit over here from BMC out of the bottom unit. So I leave this set to word clock. And then of course we have sample rate and we have the standalone mode. I have only tested this in ADAT mode. We have a standalone mode, ADAT, and we can also toggle to a mixer standalone mode. I'm really using this in ADAT, which basically with the ADAT standalone mode, your analog inputs get direct routed to the ADAT outputs, and the ADAT inputs get direct routed to the analog outputs. But the thing you have to understand too is there's an ADAT connection on the other side. So for example, if I wanted to send out 20 channels of audio, and this one only has 10 channels, I could use the bank of ADAT to send ADAT out, and then the ADAT ins on this main unit get routed directly to the analog output. So that's how I'm using this, or that's how I'm going to be using this for my Dolby Atmos 7.1.4 configuration. Okay, and then last but not least, we have the ability to reset, and then we can also see the actual firmware at the very bottom. And then we can click the main tab to bring ourselves out of the display. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for covering the tabs, these different buttons, what they can do, and we've already checked out the auto gain feature. Let's take a look at the reamping functionality here. This is something that's going to be very, very useful for people who are like a one-man or one-woman band, and they are going to be using guitars, and you want to have the ability to integrate with external hardware. We have two inputs that are on the front, which of course are instrument level inputs, because on the back, we basically have Neutrik 1/4 inch combo, which is going to be XLR or TRS, and those are our line inputs. But on the front, we can go to the instrument level. Now, we also have instrument 1 and 2 reamp out. So this can be really useful if you want to do anything where you've already recorded a performance and then you want to take that performance, you want to send it to a piece of gear. So something like a guitar pedal, or it could be a guitar amplifier, something like that. You have the ability to basically output this, but with the reamp out, you're guaranteed that you're hitting that gear at the proper impedance level. Because that's the thing we got to take into account. It's not just line level, balanced versus unbalanced. There are specific impedance levels that that type of gear is expecting. And what the reamp out does on this unit is it makes sure that it's feeding either an amplifier or a guitar pedal or any type of pedal or anything like that, the proper level. Okay, and then of course, you could re-record that back internally to your DAW, or you could even use Pipeline, anything you want. So we've covered all the functionality of the buttons. I'm not going to bother looking at the back panel because I don't have any more cameras that I can set up behind here. And also I want to kind of keep this forward facing. I'm going to redock this microphone and I want to talk about a couple other cool features. Now that we've spoken about the basics and we got everything covered, we know how to use this, we know how to use the buttons and everything like that. What I want to do is talk about a couple things that I find to be really, really useful in terms of in context of having a modern interface. And the first one is going to be Loopback. So if we head over to the cogwheel over here, we have the ability to kind of simplify universal control. We can hide the digital and the loopback functions. Then I'm only seeing 8 analog inputs on these channels over here. But if I click this cogwheel, I can choose to show digital. And then if I show digital, now I'm seeing all of my 2 banks of ADATs plus my SPDIFs. So if you want to see that, and we have our gain controls. Another nice thing about this is because these are talking to each other, if I wanted to make any adjustments on a particular unit. So let's say on input 4 over here, I wanted to engage phantom power. Notice that's happening in universal control. Also notice that I can adjust my gain from here. Now I can also hold this and I can toggle phantom power on for multiple ones at the same time just by doing this. So whatever I want to do. So that can be useful, but if you're not using any of the ADATs or the SPDIFs, then you don't want to have to see that display, so we can just temporarily toggle this off. Now let's bring Loopback in. Now with Loopback, this is where you see your actual USB returns. Now by default, we have 2 additional stereo pairs, and we have the ability to link them or make them mono. Also notice that we have a simplified universal control. If you've had any other interface like a Studio 192, you might be used to seeing all these tabs and you have a separate mixer for every single tab. In this case, we actually just see sends. But if you do want to see the actual console in universal control, then we can go into what is called fader flip mode. If we go into fader flip mode, then any one of these channels or these outputs that we select, we're actually viewing the faders that are available on the sends over here. It takes a minute to get used to, but once you understand it, it's quite easy to kind of accustom yourself to that workflow. Now for certain applications, so for example, for something like Zoom, you're going to absolutely love Loopback. So I was going to say Zoom, ScreenFlow, and also OBS. All of those applications support being able to see multiple different inputs on an audio device. Because Loopback can work in a couple different ways. One way that Loopback works is that basically you'll see multiple different options show up if you choose the sound options. You might see the name of the interface and then the name of the interface in something that's called virtual. This is not the case in this regard. If I wanted to choose an interface, I only have the HD8 here. But based on the different software applications you have, like I said, ScreenFlow has the ability to see all of the inputs, and that includes anything that you're routing via Loopback. Also, Zoom has the ability, and OBS has the ability. So really quickly, before we open up Studio One, I'm going to open up Zoom, and we'll go over this just super, super quick. So we'll let this kind of like boot up. And let's open up our sound preferences. Now, if I go into audio, notice that we have the Quantum HD8 over here. And it's also picking up this voiceover microphone. But this is something that's new to Zoom, is that we have the ability to basically choose any channel. Now, channels 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 is what gets reported by the driver as Loopback 1 left and right and Loopback 2 left and right. Like I said, this is also available for ScreenFlow, OBS, and also things like Zoom at this time. So any application that supports being able to bring in independent channels, any application, this is going to work. Okay, enough about the basics, enough about Loopback and all of this stuff. This functionality is built in. It's amazing. I definitely encourage you to take a look at it. But now what I want to do is actually take a look at using this in Studio One, because here's the thing. This is a USB interface, okay? We have a USB protocol that is kind of limited to very specific round-trip latencies. But this is, I think, the key thing that makes this particular interface amazing, is that it has integration and a custom driver that has been built. Now, when you install this, you have to actually give the extension permission in your system preferences on a Mac. I'm not entirely sure how that works on a PC. Also, we're going to boot up Studio One in the background here while I'm talking. Here's the thing. With a typical USB interface, like for example, if I was to use my Studio 192 or any USB interface, if I brought it down to software monitoring and I was at like a buffer size of 16 or 32, the types of numbers that I'm used to seeing are like in the 8 millisecond round trip latency. That is normal. But this interface can actually do a whopping 3.69 milliseconds of round trip latency with a buffer size of 16 samples. Or I think it's 4.69 if you're at a buffer size of 32 samples. So that is coming close to Thunderbolt speeds. I have a session that I've pulled open over here. I'm going to open this quickly. So now I'm actually monitoring through my Quantum HD8. And I want to double check. We'll just make sure that, let's bypass this mixer right over here. I'm going to bypass this because we're going to do software monitoring in Studio One. So we're going to come back over here. Now take a look at this. This is incredible. We are at audio device block size 16 samples, and our processing is set to medium, so our process block size is 512. But take a look at our latency figures here. This is a USB interface, and we're getting near Thunderbolt round-trip latency. Now, in terms of stability, we'll open up our performance monitor over here. We're putting a lot of load on this. I'm running a ScreenFlow to capture my screen, and that's a Retina screen, so it's capturing that 4K. I'm also capturing audio sources, and I have this record enabled. So here's what I did. I basically ran a couple different tests, and I set up 4 stereo tracks with 4 tone generators. I had an instance of ProAl in like 32 oversampling mode. And it was basically processing, but I had the volume pulled down. But it was taxing my CPU and my different cores. I had a track set up at 16 samples in terms of my process block size. I recorded for 6 minutes. My actual CPU meter was in the high 80s. There was a lot of load on my CPU. I didn't have one click, one pop, one dropout whatsoever. I stopped recording at somewhere around 6 minutes. So have I done a real world test where I've brought in an actual session and I've tried to do a bunch of stuff? No, I haven't, but I've done stress tests to the best of my abilities. Also worth mentioning that I got these units super late, and I'm literally doing this video like the day before so that I can get this video out. So I haven't had a chance to put it through every single test, but here's what I can tell you. That's incredible. And this is the thing too. I'm on an older machine. I'm on a 16-inch MacBook Pro Intel i9. That is an older system, and I'm really pushing this as hard as possible. And at the end of the day, this is a USB-C interface. This isn't Thunderbolt. So in terms of the round-trip latencies that we're seeing over here, this is not a normal thing at all. This is a custom driver that has been built specifically for this interface. And in my experience, it has been absolutely amazing. I think in general that if you're in software monitoring in Studio One, by default, Studio One ships with your dropout protection set to medium. Get this as low as you can, 32, 64, whatever the case is, and then just, record arm this or monitor enable this, click this little green Z, and you're going to hear some absolutely amazing round trip latency. Now, also, we see some basic functionality with respect to some of these features being linked in Studio One. So for example, if I go over to, this is set to input 2. If I go to input 2 and I go to this function and I start turning this down, obviously that remote control is going to adjust that. And I can also just choose my high pass filter over here. I can engage phantom power, anything like that that's happening in Studio One, it's going to happen on the units themselves. Also, we have the ability to restore audio settings. So if you have a session and you have set things up a very specific way, maybe you have a bunch of different preamp settings, you have phantom power enabled, low cuts on certain things, a basic mix even that could be happening in universal control. We have the ability to recall those settings with one click from Studio One. It gets stored in the individual song setup. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention, and that was with respect to reamping. There's basically two approaches that you could take in my mind. If you had, for example, a mono track and you wanted to pass that out, you could simply set this to the output and then set the input to be whichever input you're using and re-record. But what I would probably do in that scenario is, let's say I wanted to reamp track 1. I would probably set up a pipeline preset. And then in pipeline, in terms of my output, I'd make sure that I'm using either Reamp 1 or Reamp 2, because those are what I want to use to get the proper impedance level sent out. And then in terms of my input, if I was using a pedal, then I would want to be using a Reamp output. And then I would basically just choose either input 1 or 2, which would allow me to use the instrument level input. And then I would basically know that I'm bringing back in the right impedance. And the benefit of using pipeline would be that I don't actually have this physically connected right now, but we could basically just have one click where we could click auto, and then it will be sample accurate in terms of any delay offsets or anything like that. It is basically doing a ping through the equipment, and then you're guaranteed that everything you have is completely sample accurate. So this interface, if you are a content creator, having the ability to record your DAW outs, even multiple sets of DAW outs, if you wanted to record your clicks separately and your main outs, having the ability to patch this in virtually to any software like OBS for streaming or anything like ScreenFlow if you're capturing content, having a really nice looking, modern sounding interface with really, really great converters. And then the benefit here is with that custom driver, you have that extremely low round trip latency. I think this is going to make a lot of people very, very happy. A modernized, updated interface, really, really clean look, really nice display, some customization in terms of being able to dial down things like brightness and stuff like that. Plays really nice with Studio One, really great low latency monitoring mixer with not a lot of clutter if you wanted to be using this with third-party DAWs and third-party applications. But on the whole, a really awesome interface. I'm super excited to get it connected with the 7.1.4 system. Really great system for anybody, whether you're trying to make a move step up, whether you're working in stereo, or if you need a basic surround setup, or even ganging two of these together like I'm doing for the immersive room. So that is the Quantum HD8, the first post-Fender acquisition interface we see from PreSonus. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.